Buenos dias, everybody. Coming at you live from the Idaho Falls office with another real estate podcast. And hopefully these are beneficial. Please let me know. Shoot me a text or a DM or comment on this if you're watching and say what up. They're kind of janky. I kind of just throw them together, but I figure that they might be really helpful for you guys learning about real estate. And I want to just keep them concise and to the point so that you can learn the bare bones, and then we are going to master it in the off season. Last week, I talked about kind of the real estate process and how it goes from making an offer to putting down earnest money to doing the inspection and then going through the loan process and final disclosures and the title company and all of that. So if you didn't watch that one, make sure you watch that because it'll give quite a bit of context to what we're going to talk about today. And today, it'll probably be a little bit shorter meeting. I want to talk about kind of loan strategy, and I'm not an expert on this, but I have obviously done a lot of loans. And so I want to just briefly explain the different types of loans and the pros and cons and what to look for and what to watch out for, and just kind of go through all that and take this adventure one step farther. But again, just a plug to continue pushing. The Aptive Cup starts tomorrow, or if you watch this tomorrow, the Aptive Cup starts today. Today's Wednesday. And I really want to see our teams throw down. I want to see you guys pushing. I want to see you guys stretching. I want to see you do more than you've ever done. Obviously, because of what it will mean for your income right now, but especially because I know what it will give you with potential future real estate investments. I've got some really cool things cooking in the works right now. Getting my real estate license in Ohio, I think that's going to be a really great market for group investments and things like that. Working with several of you on getting a primary residence for the first time. I know Easton made a soft offer on a property this week. I know Will made a soft offer on a property this week. A lot of exciting things coming. So this is the real estate region. We are going to continue to buy more real estate than anyone else, and we are going to build some mega wealth. Now let's jump into things. Let me share my screen. Okay, so you guys should be able to see exactly what I'm looking at. And this is I just made this briefly. It's just a little Google slide, but it's going to allow me to kind of talk about the ins and outs of a loan and down payments and things like that. So last week I talked about getting pre-approved, which is when you meet with a lender before before making an offer on a house. And so that lender, he has a variety of loan packages that you as the buyer can utilize to help you get into real estate. Now, obviously, you could just buy a property all cash. So, say you find a single family house that you want to buy for $120,000. Okay, you could just utilize all cash. So you take all of your summer earnings or most of your summer earnings or 2 summers earnings and you buy that property all cash. You can do that. People do that. If you follow Dave Ramsey, that is what he recommends. I do not recommend that. And I'll briefly explain why, and I'll use a real life example with this. So instead of spending $120,000 to cash buy one property, I recommend you use a down payment of 20 to 25%. We'll say 25% for sake of easy numbers. That's $30K to buy the same property. Now, so you have 100. Let's just, we're imagining here. Let's imagine you have $120,000 sitting in the bank. You could use that $120,000 and buy one property, or you could piece that $120,000 out and use 25%, $30,000 to buy that same property, and then you'd be left over with $90,000. So essentially, or theoretically, you could go out and buy 3 additional properties with that same investment, with that same 120K. So all of a sudden you have 4 doors instead of just 1. Now, the reason 4 is better than 1, it's cooler. Okay, it's cooler to say you have 4 doors, but also it will earn you more income. So if you just own one property, this property is probably going to be rented out for, call it $1,000 a month. You are going to make $1,000 a month in perpetuity. And obviously with time, you know, that rent is going to increase. So after a couple of years, maybe you're making 1,200, and then a couple more, you're making 1,500, and so on and so forth. That one property is also going to appreciate in value. So maybe 5 years down the road, it's worth 150K. 10 years down the road, it's worth 175K. 20 years from now, it's worth 200K. You made $80,000 that way. That same one property, you can use it for cost segregation, which I've talked briefly about before, which essentially is piecing it out and writing it off your taxes. So it's good, but it's good on a scale of 1. When you use leverage, when you use banks, when you piece it out and you buy 4 properties with the same $120,000, you get all of those same benefits times 4. Okay. And a lot of you will say, or Dave Ramsey will say, or people who are proponents of cash will say, well, you're going to cash flow less. Yes, that's true if you look at just one property, because you're going to have a loan. You were cash flowing $1,000 on the other one because you didn't have a loan. You're going to have a loan on this one, and maybe your mortgage payment is $800 a month, or let's say $700 a month. That's probably realistic. So you're only going to cash flow $300. But if you buy 4 properties, 4 times 300 is 1,200. So you're actually cash flowing more. Not only are you cash flowing more, you're also getting principal pay down. Every month when your renters make the payment and you pay your mortgage, most of that payment goes to interest, but a small portion does go to the principal. So every month you owe a little bit less. The first month you'll owe 90 grand. That's how much you financed. The second month you'll owe 89,750. So you got $250 in principal pay down, and that's going to continue all the way down until you own the property outright. So you get cash flow, you get principal pay down. It's going to appreciate. In 5 years, it might be worth 150, like we talked about. In 10 years, it might be worth 175. And in 20 years, it might be worth 250. But you're getting that same appreciation on 3 other properties. Okay. And this is where it really makes sense to leverage. You're getting that same appreciation times 4. So if you made 80 grand on this one property in 10 years, in this situation, you would make $320,000 from that same 120K that you initially invested. Cost segregation, again, that's a more complex theme that most of you won't get into for a few years, but you can cost segregate 4 properties. So now instead of writing just 1 off of your taxes, you have 4. It's awesome, saves you way more money. And so I'm a big believer in utilizing down payments, in utilizing banks to help you earn more money. It's the principle of leverage, okay? So if you think about like, I'm trying to think of what a good example would be. If you think about a door, okay? If you put the door stopper right by the edge of the door, it's going to be you're going to need a huge door stopper because the door has a lot of momentum. But if you put the door stopper right out by the end, that wedge will help keep it shut. So this is the same principle, just applied to real estate, or like a teeter-totter. Okay, if you have a teeter-totter and the thing's right in the middle, but if you move it to this side, I mean, a small person could lift up an elephant because they have all the leverage in the world. Okay, so you got to think about leverage when it comes to real estate investing, and utilizing banks, utilizing down payments really helps you leverage your money. It's going to take most people several years to save up $120,000. If you're absurdly good at this job, you could do it in 1 for sure, but it's hard. Okay, and that's a ton of money. Most people can utilize leverage and get into real estate every single year with $5, $10, $15, $25, $50,000. Okay, it makes it way more attainable, and it makes your increases way better. Instead of waiting 3 or 4 years until you have 120K in the bank, do it in 1 when you have 30K in the bank. So that's principle of leverage, and we'll talk more about that here in just a little bit. So essentially, there's 5 types of loans that I want to talk about today. And these first 2 are really the 2 that are going to be by far the ones that you guys will deal with the most. And I'll kind of talk about them in conjunction, and I'll probably start with an FHA loan. So you go to a bank, like I use Idaho Central Credit Union. Tony Ekman is the lender who I work with most often. And you say, I want to apply for a loan. He's going to give you a few different options. So an FHA loan stands for Federal Housing Administration, I believe is the A. Essentially, it's a government-backed mortgage that is insured by the Federal Housing Administration. So the bank can give you this loan with a very low down payment because the government is backing them up. So that if you don't make your payments, they have this massive, entity that can just print money at will that will kind of save their bacon. So FHA loans are great for banks, and they're great for first-time home buyers or people who don't have a lot of cash sitting around. FHA loans are also great for new investors who are willing to own or occupy property. So let's talk a little bit more about that. Point B, FHA loans are great for buyers without excellent credit and without a large down payment. So typically the credit score that you have to have is a little bit more forgiving for an FHA loan. Again, because the government is backing them up. The government is saving their bacon. If you guys watched last week's podcast, you'll remember that I talked about appraisals and how the appraiser's job is essentially to save the bank's butt. Okay, if you stop making payments, this appraiser is making sure that the bank has enough equity in the property to fire sell it and not get into too much trouble. The government kind of continues to protect the bank's interests by using something called mortgage insurance. And I don't think I have this. Oh yeah, I do have this. Point C. So this talks a little bit about it, and I'll talk more about it here. So mortgage insurance is an insurance policy that you have to have required by the bank anytime you put less than 20% down. So if you put 10% down, 5% down, 3.5% down, 1% down, you are going to have mortgage insurance. And I talked a little bit about this last week, just to reiterate again. Mortgage insurance is an insurance policy that only benefits the bank. And what it says is, if this buyer stops making payments, the bank can file a claim with this insurance company, and the insurance company, which is essentially the government, I think for FHA loans, I believe, will come in and help the bank not lose money. And so you're only putting 3.5% down on an FHA loan, as little as 3.5% down, which is awesome. Obviously, that doesn't give the bank a whole lot of equity to play with. They're paying out $288,000 on a $300,000 loan. Like, if you don't make your payments, they will probably lose money, because they'll have to evict you, and then they'll have to fix the property up, and then they'll have to pay a real estate agent to sell it. And so they don't have a lot of wiggle room there. So this insurance policy, they can file a claim if you stop making payments, and it protects them. And the more you guys get into real estate investing and the longer you'll live, you'll realize that the system is really set up to protect the institution and not you as a person or an investor. So you always got to play the game to your advantage. And this is one of those areas where they play the game to their advantage. And, it is what it is. You just got to know the rules of the game, and you got to play to win. And so how much does mortgage insurance cost? It depends on exactly how much you're putting down, exactly how much the asset is worth. There's a whole bunch of different things that go into it. But generally speaking, on like a $300,000 house, if you do an FHA loan, it's probably $150 a month. Now, some of you will say, well, is it worth just saving up to get to 20%? My answer is no. I will always borrow as much as possible because leverage is such a powerful principle, and I'm going to use leverage to my advantage. So I'm going to make up for that $150 by getting the best buy now, by taking advantage of cash flow, principal pay down, tax advantages, and appreciation. So it's worth it to buy. It's worth it to borrow as much as you possibly can. So with an FHA loan, and I'll talk about this in conjunction with conventional here in just a second, you have to pay mortgage insurance for as long as you have the loan. So if it's a 30-year loan and you keep the house all 30 years, you are going to pay $150 a month for 30 freaking years. Like, they are cashing a check on that. If you have the house for 3 years and then you sell it, obviously you sold it, the FHA loan or the mortgage insurance goes away. But you have mortgage insurance for the life of the loan on that property. Now, that is different to conventional, because once you get to 20% equity, whether that's through appreciation or whether that's through a few years of making payments, you can file a request and drop the mortgage insurance. So that's kind of a disadvantage of an FHA loan, but it's still worth it because it's such a powerful tool to use to get into properties quicker. It says FHA will typically be 2.2 to 2.8% of the borrowed amount over the course of the year. So if it's a $3,000 or $300,000 loan, 2.2% would be $6,000 divided by 12 months. Is that right? That seems high to me. I think that's higher than it actually is. It's typically about $150 a month on a $300,000 loan. It is more expensive, and you cannot refinance out of it. Those are very, very true. With FHA loans, we talked about the inspection. So there will be some lender required minimum conditions of the property. You can't use FHA loans to buy like fixer uppers. It has to be in relatively good condition. FHA rares are very common. And so in a competitive situation, if you're an FHA buyer and you have someone come in with all cash or a conventional loan, the sellers will lean that direction because the bank can literally require fixes on the property in order for you to be able to utilize that FHA loan. And it can be silly things like the stairs don't have a railing. The paint is slightly peeling on the outside. The window on the main floor is too small to be a safe exit. Like they can require fixes like that, which ends up costing either you as the buyer or the seller some friction in this process and obviously some money. So FHA loans are an awesome tool. They are easier to get for first-time home buyers and people with less than incredible credit. You can use a really, really low down payment, which is freaking awesome. You will have mortgage insurance for the life of the loan, and it is more expensive than a conventional loan. And there are lender required repairs, so the home has to be in decent shape. Now, another huge advantage for FHA loans. So the big advantages are obviously the really low down payment, a little bit looser restrictions on credit. But perhaps the biggest advantage is you can utilize these on multi-unit properties, up to 4 units. You can't go over 4, so you can't do it on a 5-plex, a 12-plex, a 16-plex, under 5 units. So 4 units or less. So duplex, triplex, 4-plex. You can, if you're willing to move into one of the units, you have to intend to live there for a year. Now, if life comes your way and you have to move out, you can, but you have to intend to live there for a year. You can get into the whole property for 3.5% down. And this is a beautiful strategy. It's called house hacking. Talked a little bit about last week. I'll probably talk about it in future weeks as well, because house hacking is the best possible way for new investors to quickly acquire real estate. When I first got into real estate, I house hacked like 3 times. Ryan, my brother, is kind of the king of house hacking. He first moved into a duplex in a 4-plex in Rexburg that Chandler sold to him, a $380,000 4-plex, and he used an FHA loan, 3.5% down. So Ryan got into this 4-plex for like $13,000 or $14,000 out of pocket. It was sick. That 4-plex has since gone up in value over $100,000. Ryan is currently cash flowing a few $100s a month on it. So off of like a $14,000 investment and Ryan moving into this property, he's made over $120,000 in net worth, which is crazy. If Ryan sold the property today, he'd get a $100,000 check and he would be super, super, super grateful for that $13,000 in that FHA loan. And again, that just shows the principle of leverage really well. Ryan really 10x'd his investment because of this FHA loan. So awesome thing to do. When the market is really hot or really high, it can be hard to get an FHA loan on a multi-unit property, but it's always possible. And you should always be striving for things like this. Now, conventional loans, you cannot typically get a low down payment option on an investment property, even if you are willing to move into it. So it pretty much has to be an FHA loan. And hopefully that answers a lot of your questions on that. It's kind of hard to explain, I guess, as we go without people asking. Hopefully I'm covering everything, but if there are questions, message them or comment them and I'll reply and get answers to them. Let's move on to conventional loans. So conventional loans are not government backed. It's kind of just you and the bank. You will still have PMI if you put less than 20% down. So typically, like with a conventional loan, you can get into a single family home with a 5% down payment. And I really recommend this. Okay. I recommend paying PMI and keeping that 15% in your pocket so that you can invest in more properties. So if you buy a $300,000 house with a conventional loan, you can put 15 grand down and it keeps $45,000 in your pocket to use on other investments. Yes, you are going to have PMI, but only until the property appreciates and you get to 20% equity, or you pay down the property for the next 5-10 years until you get to 20% equity, and then you can drop that PMI. So you do have to have decent credit. Your credit has to be a little bit better than it would with an FHA loan. And they will closely monitor your DTI ratio, your debt to income ratio. And this is something you have to be very careful of as a door-to-door salesman. So if you make $100,000 this summer, but then you meet with your accountant and he's a total wizard and he's pulling hacks, ins and outs, and you're writing off this and you're writing off that, and you're being super aggressive because you hate taxes, which we all hate taxes. Taxation is theft. And you get your income down and you're able to write everything off, and then you only show $20,000 in income. It's going to be very hard to get approved for a property because of this little rule right here. Okay, if you have a $200 car payment, 200 times 12 is 2,400. All of a sudden, the bank's going to look at this and go, this kid only has $16,000 or $17,400 and $600 in disposable income. Like, he can't afford a house. The payment on this house is $2,000 a month, and he's only making $17,000 a year. He can't afford a house. So you have to be really careful with your debt to income ratio. Writing off too much is a cardinal sin. You have to be prudent with how much you write off, and that's why I recommend meeting with loan officers. I'll actually have a loan officer come on one of these and give some advice. And then also avoiding purchases that are monthly is the other big thing. And so cars are the obvious one there. Like, we freaking love cars. We all finance cars. But if you get too many cars, that's really going to affect your debt to income ratio. You're going to have too much debt and too little income for a bank to give you a loan on a property. Other, kind of similar, but maybe less obvious things that people do, student loans. Okay, student loans do affect your debt to income ratio. If you finance a fridge like at RC Willey, that will affect your debt to income ratio. Credit cards will affect your debt to income ratio. I had a situation once with my wife where we were under contract on a duplex and a fourplex, and we were buying them in her name. That's a story for another day. Once you get to 10 personal loans, you can't have any more. So then you can use your spouse, and then eventually you go to business loans. So I'm to the point where I have 10 in my name, and I think Emma has like 4 or 5 in her name. But we were buying this duplex and this fourplex in her name. And right before closing, it's my mistake, she freaking charged up her credit card and paid off. She had just had Rose, I think. So this is like 2 years ago. So she paid off all of our doctor bills with her credit card, which is great. But all of a sudden her credit card showed like $8,000 in owed money right before we were supposed to close on these properties. And that affected our debt to income ratio, even though we had the cash to pay it off like the same day. It affected our debt to income ratio when the bank pulled our credit for the last time. And our interest rate ended up going up by like 1.5% or something stupid. So essentially this one mistake cost us like $300 or $400 a month for forever, as long as we own these stupid properties. So you got to be really, really conscientious of these things as you're buying real estate. Be mindful of your debt to income ratio, be mindful of your credit. And I'll talk more about that in future videos, but that's just kind of a story to illustrate the point. So conventional loans are an awesome tool. When you get into really buying investment properties, like 4 units and less is what you use conventional loans for, you will typically have to put 20 to 25% down. So when I go and buy that duplex, that fourplex, and I don't move into them, I utilize a conventional loan. I don't have primary mortgage insurance, and I have to put 20 to 25% down. So if it's a $400,000 fourplex, that's $100,000 out of my pocket. You guys as new investors can utilize this FHA loan, get in for 3.5%, which is freaking sick. Everyone should use their FHA loan. People will ask, well, what about my debt to income ratio? I have 15 loans in my name. How is my debt to income ratio surviving? I also have a loan on the Ferrari. I also have a loan on my boat. I also have a loan on Emma's Grand Wagoneer. How is my debt to income ratio surviving? It's not. Here's what happens. As you acquire rental properties, you sign 1-year leases with renters, and then the bank will count that rent as income for you to offset the debt from the property. So I have, 35 rental units that are bringing in $35,000. I'll break down my personal finances sometime, but just for number's sakes, $35,000 a month in rent. So the bank looks at it and goes, oh, Garrett's making good money. He's writing a lot off his taxes. So his income shows us this. But then he's got $35,000 a month of income from these rental properties to offset the $22,000 a month in mortgage payments that he has going out. So that's how I'm able to keep buying. That's how I'm able to utilize my debt to income ratio, is you use rent from these rental properties to qualify for future purchases and to offset the debt from the property that you just bought. So like if you buy an FHA property, you live there for 6 months, you want to move out and you want to buy a house for you and your wife, you rent out all 4 units, you rent out the unit that you're in, you sign the lease, and then you close on the new property and you utilize the income from this fourplex to show the bank that you still have money coming in. It's an awesome thing. Jumbo loans. So there's a certain limit and it varies by county and especially by state. But once your loan goes above that amount, it's no longer a conventional loan and you can't get FHA loans. It has to be a jumbo loan. So loans of more than the conventional limit. Around here, it's around $650,000. And every year that adjusts by a little bit. Jumbo loans are similar to conventional loans. They often require 10 to 20% down, and you have to have pretty great credit because it's such a freaking big loan. Fixed rate. So these two are essentially just variations of the loans we've already talked about. FHA loans are generally speaking fixed rates. So typically 15 or 30 years. This is true. Forever it's been 15 or 30 years, but they actually just added a 40-year option. So that's how long you're making payments on the loan for. Obviously, the longer the term, the less your monthly payment, but also the more interest you're making. I'm a big believer in the 30-year loan. And if you have extra money that you want to, you can pay that loan down faster and you could pay it off in 15 years. But if you get into a pickle where you can't make a larger payment for whatever reason, or the property's not rented out for a few months, you aren't required to make that bigger payment, which is why a 15-year loan can get scary. I actually made an Instagram reel kind of illustrating this point on the first property I ever bought. We did a 15-year loan because it gets you a little bit lower interest rate. You're going to pay it off twice as quick. The monthly payment's only a few $100s more. But when I went to rent it, I couldn't really cover the mortgage, and that stressed me out, and I sold the property. I wish I would have done a 30-year loan because I easily could have rented it, and I would probably still own that property today. So hindsight's 2020. I'm a big believer in the 30-year loan. 40-year loan, it can be a good tool. To be frank, it scares me. You're adding 10 years to the loan. Even as a young person, the likelihood of you paying that off in your lifetime is hard. Like I'm 30, 31. It wouldn't be paid off until I'm 71. That just seems like a long time. And it only saves you $150 a month because you're already extending it out so far. So personally, I'm probably going to avoid 40-year loans, but if you guys feel good about them, more power to you. But your payment, your mortgage payment doesn't change for the entire length of the loan. So you've got 30 years where your mortgage will not change. Now, your property taxes and your insurance can still adjust, usually up, but theoretically down as well. But your mortgage will not change. Okay, it stays the same for 30 years or 15 years or 40 years. So conventional loans, typically fixed rate. FHA loans, typically fixed rate. Now, here's the difference, because you're probably thinking, well, aren't all loans fixed rate? There is an option to do an ARM, which stands for an adjustable rate mortgage. Interest rates fluctuate with the market after a certain period of time. So like right now, when rates are really high, a lot of people are doing ARMs because they think that the interest rates will go down in a few years, and you can typically get a little bit better rate with an ARM. And so what this will look like is the bank will say, okay, you're going to get a 5-year ARM. So your rate is going to be 6% for the next 5 years. And then in 5 years, your payment, depending on what the market does, depending on what interest rates do, your payment will either go up by this amount or it will stay the same. Okay, or you can refinance and lower it. So within 5 years, if interest rates go up, right now they're at like 7%. Say in 5 years they're at 10%. Your monthly payment would change because your interest rate will increase slightly because you have an adjustable rate mortgage. Okay, or 7 years. In 7 years, your monthly payment could go up by 1.5%. And it's all going to be in the loan docs and things like that. Now, why would anyone use these loans? It gets you a lower payment now. And if you know I'm not going to live in this house forever, like I'm going to sell it, or I'm going to move out, or I'm going to be filthy rich in 3 years and won't care, like can be a great option. Your monthly payment is less now. And if you know you're going to sell the house in 3 to 5 years, by all means, it can be great. You are protected some. They don't just, the rate's not going to double. Like there's some restrictions on how much it can go up, but typically it'll go up like every 2 years or something like that. Or if you really believe that the market is going to correct and interest rates are going to come back down to like 3%, you can do an ARM. And when they come back down to 3%, you can refinance and get that better rate. Okay. So that's a very brief kind of overview of ARMs, but you'll hear this term a lot right now. Like a lot of people are doing ARMs, an adjustable rate mortgage. Interest rates will fluctuate with the market after a certain period of time. 7/6 ARM is common. 5/6 ARM is also common. The rate is typically lower for the first set of years, but it can go higher after that. It can be great if you know that you won't be in the home long term. A lot of commercial, like big time investments, like when Chandler goes out and buys a 32-plex, most of those are on an ARM of some kind. Like, hey, in 5 years, 10 years, the interest rate's going to change. That's a way for banks and investment companies to kind of sweeten the deal for themselves, I guess, if you'll say. So those are kind of just a bird's eye view of loans. There's way more that goes into it. I'm not a licensed lender or anything like that. These are just kind of my experience and some thoughts on loans. Again, awesome tool. You should always leverage. Now let's see how long I've been going. Does it say? I don't know if it says. I'll go through one more thing and then I'm going to wrap up. So BRRRR versus flipping. So this is kind of getting more into the investment realm, not so much the just loan realm, but this is like actually investment. But you can still use BRRRR and flipping as a very new investor, as an FHA loan, things like that. So most of you have probably heard about flipping, and flipping is essentially when you buy a property for cheap. You know, you get typically it's a rundown property that needs a lot of work, and you get it for cheap, and you fix it up and you flip it and you sell it and you make way more money. You know, you get a check, you know, you bought I'll tell the story with my 17th Street property, and I'll tell it both ways. So I have this little house on 17th Street. It's a 4-bed, 1-bath house. And I bought it like 3.5 years ago. It was right before COVID. I still remember because I found a huge bottle of hand sanitizer in the property, and I ended up making a joke about doubling my investment right away. It was funny. But anywho, I found this little house, and it was an expired listing on the market, and the guy had originally listed it for 160. It didn't sell. And then he dropped it down to 140 and it didn't sell. And then he dropped it down to 130 and it didn't sell. And then he just took the listing off the market. So I got a hold of him and I offered him $102,000. And I didn't think there was any way he'd accept, but for some reason he did, which was sick. And maybe it was the scare of COVID. So 102 grand, and he accepted my offer. Now the property needed some work. It was a little beat up. The cabinets were in rough shape. The floors were in rough shape. It for sure needed a new roof. Could use repainting. Like, it was beat up. But at the same time, I got an inspection on it, and it wasn't like I was going to be into it 50 grand to get it running. It was like, hey, I can probably replace the roof, replace a couple windows, redo the floors, repaint stuff. Like, I can do some of that myself, and it'll be worth way more, and it'll rent for a ton when I'm done. And so I ended up buying the property. I used my real estate commission. I also got him down during the inspection, another $2,000 or $3,000. So I ended up into this property like $95,000. Now here's something that we'll talk about more in the future with investing strategies, but I used a HELOC, which is a home equity line of credit for my primary residence. Essentially, it's using the equity from your house that you live in to act almost as like a lower interest rate credit card to buy the house in cash. So I wrote a check for this property for $95,000. I paid cash for it. Really, the cash came from my HELOC, which was the equity from my primary residence, because my primary residence had gone up in value. But I used my HELOC to pay cash for this property. So I wrote a $95,000 check, and I owned the property outright at that point. We replaced the roof. We repainted the cabinets. We redid the floors. I did a lot of it with my dad. I repainted everything inside. I have this picture of me spraying with the spray gun, and I'm like totally white because the spray gun was leaking. We redid floors. We did quite a bit to the house to make it look nicer, but we didn't do anything like I say, it wasn't absurd. The roof, I think, was like 6,500. The floors were like 2,000. Repainting it was like 1,000. Redoing the cabinets was a couple grand. And so all in all, I was into this property probably $12,000. So I have this $95,000 property that I'm now into another 12,000. So I'm into it 107. Now at this point, this is where the difference between BRRRR and flipping comes in. I could have flipped the property. I could have listed it back for sale and probably sold it for north of 140 easy. I have here 30 grand after paying commissions. I think I probably could have sold it for 160 to 170, somewhere in there. So I could have made 30, 40, maybe $50,000 after paying real estate commissions all at once because I forced appreciation. By me going in and making this kind of dumpy rundown property that no one wanted a little bit nicer and more livable, it would have easily sold for way more money. And with flipping, guys, and with BRRRRs, the money is not made in being the guy who's really, really good at remodeling. Like that's definitely an important part of it. But the money is made in finding a killer deal. Like just by getting this house for 95 grand, I probably could have sold it as is for 115 and made 20 or 25 grand. Like I found a really good deal on this property. So that's where the money is made. So I could have flipped it. I could have sold it and made, 30, 40, 50 grand. It was awesome. Would have been sick. Instead of flipping it, I did the BRRRR method, which BRRRR stands for buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat. Buy, rehab. So buy is obvious. Rehab is fix it up, which is what I just described. Rent. So I signed a lease on this property for $1,200, which was sick. Then you go to the bank and you say, hey, I own this property cash. Okay, I own it. I've got it rented out. It's a nice property. I want to refinance it. The bank will then send out an appraiser. The appraiser will tell you what it's worth, and they'll give you money. They'll loan to you money at a certain interest rate against that property. So all of a sudden I have a loan on this property. The bank, this is back when interest rates were awesome. I got like a 3.3% interest rate, and the bank gave me a $105,000 check. And so I still had $7,000 in the property, but I got a $105,000 check. I paid off my HELOC and I paid off some of my construction expenses because they said the property is worth $140,000. And you have to have, again, they make you keep equity in it. Property is worth $140,000. You have to have 25% equity. Here's $105,000, not $140,000. So I got a $105,000 check. I paid off my HELOC so that I wasn't making interest payments there and I wasn't getting myself into trouble there. Again, it's kind of like a credit card where you're paying interest, but it's lower interest rate and it's borrowed against your house. I paid off my HELOC. I paid off the money that I had done with construction. I left $7,000 in the property, but now I own this asset. I own this house that's worth $140,000, $150,000. I only have $7,000 of my money in there. I've leveraged with the bank and I've gotten a loan. My monthly payment's only like $650 a month, $600 a month. And I have this thing rented out for $1,250. And so now I am cash flowing $600 a month for forever because I kept the house. And I've still got equity in the house, and the house has appreciated more since then. Okay, the house is probably worth $225 now because the market kept going up. And so I could have made $30,000, $40,000 right away, but because I kept it, I'm going to cash flow $600, $700 a month forever, and the property is worth more now. So if I sold it now, I could probably make $120,000. So flipping is an active income strategy. People will do it as their job. They'll do it to make money now. BRRRR is a passive income strategy. So this is setting you up for forever. So I'm a huge believer in both of these things, but if you're financially able, which all of us should be because of this job, the BRRRR method is so much more attractive long-term. Here is this property. And if you want to look through and see some of what I'm talking about. It stressed me out though. It was the first time I did this. So then I took that HELOC money. I took that $95,000 that I got back and I bought a house in Ashton, Idaho, cash with my HELOC again for 80 grand. So all of a sudden that same money that I had already used, I used again. I ended up having my brother Andrew and his wife Sienna help me fix up that property. And I went up there quite a bit and did some work too. And we ended up flipping that house. So that house, I kept it for like a year and a half, and then it stressed me out, so I did sell it. But that house, I cash flowed on it like $300 or $400 a month with none of my own money into it because I refinanced it. Or did I refinance it? I think I might have just made HELOC payments on it. I can't remember. But anywho, I used that money a second time to buy a second house, and I ended up making like 30 or 40 grand when I sold that house, and I moved that money into a duplex. And so this is how you can really grow in real estate. Like, there are so many ways to utilize real estate to set you up for the future. This house on 17th Street, I still own it. It's one of my favorites. It essentially makes like half of my boat payment every month, and I freaking love it. And I'm super grateful for that $7,000 I have in it. And I'm super grateful for learning experience. And I'm grateful for banks and that they allowed me to leverage. I used a conventional loan when I refinanced out of it, an investment loan. It's one of my 10 that I have in my name, to build wealth and grow. So down payments are good. Leverage is good. Conventional loans are good. FHA loans are great. Utilize these, especially on multi-units. Eventually you'll get into jumbo loans. Fixed rates are awesome. The mortgage rates do kind of suck right now, so ARMs can be a huge advantage if you know you're not going to be in the property forever, and if you think rates are going to go down. Both BRRRR and flipping are awesome real estate investing strategies. Flipping is an active income strategy. BRRRR is a passive income strategy. That 17th Street property was sweet. It's like a 90% cash on cash return, and I will keep it forever. Real estate is powerful, guys. Real estate is the way that all of us can get ahead and get out of the rat race. You guys keep riding with us at Aptive, and I really think we're going to take over the real estate world. Like, I really believe in this group. This group of people owns more real estate than anyone else in the door-to-door space and most people in the world. And it's because we're constantly talking about it. We're constantly thinking about it. We're constantly going in on stuff and figuring it out. It is epic. Again, talk to your team leader about real estate. Make sure that you're talking about it with your team. Like, make it a part of what your life vision is. Make it a part of who you are. And remember that the harder you work now, the better off you will be investing in real estate. I couldn't have bought that 17th Street property if I didn't have equity in my house. I couldn't have had equity in my house if I wouldn't have had a down payment to put down on it to begin with. Like, it all ties together. I wouldn't have had $12,000 to do the rehab on that property if I wouldn't have worked hard in door-to-door sales. So it all ties together. It all comes back to hard work, discipline, and doing what you're supposed to right now. So if you don't have a big why, make this part of your why. Like, I really, really believe in you guys. I really, really want to help every single one of us make real estate a reality. If you can get into one property or one great investment early on, it is going to set you up for forever. Imagine if you can be like Aiden Parent, Andrew Miller, Will Fulton, Chase Flynn, some of these guys who are buying before they're even like 21 years old. Like, that is the path that I want for you guys. And if you're already over 21, if you're like me, I didn't start till I was almost 27, but it's still been incredible. Okay. I believe in it. I believe in all of us. I really love you guys. Grateful for those of you who watch. Say what up if you did watch and found it helpful, and much love, everybody.